December 26, 1944, Bastogne, Belgium. Staff Sergeant Francis S. Currey watched the sky darken with aircraft as German Luftwaffe fighters screamed overhead, their engine roar drowning out the crack of small arms fire echoing through the frozen Ardennes forest. The 30th Infantry Division had been holding this critical road junction for 3 days, but air support had been grounded by the same winter storm that allowed Hitler's surprise offensive to punch through American lines. Then Currey looked down at the M2 Browning machine gun mounted on the disabled half-track beside him. The vehicle's crew lay dead in the snow. The gun's ammunition belt fed smoothly into the receiver. 750 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition designed to shred aircraft aluminum like paper. His hands moved to the gun's spade grips before his mind fully processed what he was about to attempt. The formation approaching from the east wasn't a dozen aircraft. Intelligence reports later confirmed what Currey saw that frozen morning: a mixed formation of Focke-Wulf FW-190s and Messerschmitt Bf-109s, more than 60 aircraft, assigned to strafe and bomb American positions to support the surrounded German forces pressing toward Bastogne. 1 soldier, 1 heavy machine gun, 60 enemy fighters. What happened in the next 17 minutes would become one of the most documented yet least known defensive actions of the Battle of the Bulge, a stand that air defense analysts would study for decades, not because it should have succeeded, but because every calculation said it was mathematically impossible. By late December 1944, the German Ardennes offensive had thrown American forces into chaos. For 2 weeks, 3 German armies had been driving west through Belgium, attempting to split Allied forces and capture the vital port of Antwerp. The weather had grounded Allied air superiority, the one advantage American commanders had counted on absolutely. Without fighter cover and tactical bombers, isolated American units faced German armor and infantry with nothing but small arms and whatever artillery they could bring to bear. The Luftwaffe, sensing opportunity, committed its dwindling fighter reserves to ground attack missions. The FW-190F-8 fighter bomber variant carried a 500-kilogram bomb load and 4 20mm cannons. The Bf-109G-14 provided fighter escort with its 30mm centerline cannon and twin 13mm machine guns. These weren't reconnaissance flights. These were massed strikes designed to shatter defensive positions through overwhelming firepower. American anti-aircraft capabilities near Bastogne were virtually non-existent. The M51 Quad 50 caliber mount, the standard mobile air defense system, required a functional vehicle, trained crew, and clear fields of fire. Most had been destroyed, abandoned during retreats, or were positioned to defend command posts and supply depots, not forward infantry positions. Pilots who survived Luftwaffe strafing runs described feeling utterly helpless as German fighters made repeated passes, knowing their M1 Garands and Browning automatic rifles couldn't touch aircraft moving at 350 miles per hour. The statistics backed up the terror. During the first week of the Ardennes offensive, the Luftwaffe flew over 900 sorties, destroying or damaging an estimated 200 American vehicles and inflicting more than 400 casualties on exposed infantry. Ground commanders were screaming for air defense, any air defense. But qualified anti-aircraft gunners were specialized personnel, trained at dedicated schools, certified in ballistic computation, deflection shooting, and aircraft recognition. Francis Currey had none of that training. The 30th Infantry Division knew him as a problem. His personnel file documented 2 previous instances of what medical officers termed combat stress reaction. Modern terminology would call them acute anxiety episodes. In October, after particularly heavy fighting near Aachen, Germany, he'd been temporarily relieved from frontline duty. The evaluation read, emotionally unstable under prolonged stress, recommend reassignment to rear echelon duties. He'd refused the reassignment. Against medical advice, Currey had returned to his unit, to the same squad he'd fought beside since Normandy. His company commander, Captain Edward Withy, later wrote that Currey was the kind of soldier who couldn't be kept away from a fight, even when the fight was killing him from the inside. What made the situation at Bastogne particularly devastating was the complete absence of depth in American defensive positions. German forces had surrounded the town, collapsing what should have been miles of defensive perimeter into a tight circle barely 3 miles in diameter. Every position was a frontline position. Every soldier was exposed. And when the Luftwaffe came, there was nowhere to hide. The frozen ground was too hard to dig, and the scattered forest offered no meaningful cover from above. For 3 days, infantrymen had watched German fighters make unopposed runs, unable to do anything but press themselves into snow and prey. The psychological toll was immense. Veterans later described the helplessness as worse than artillery. At least with shelling, you could dig in, could do something. Against aircraft, you just waited to die. Intelligence desperately needed to demonstrate that ground forces could contest German air superiority, even without dedicated anti-aircraft systems. Morale was fracturing, but every tactical manual said the same thing. Small arms fire against modern fighters was wasteful, dangerous to friendly forces due to falling bullets, and psychologically damaging when inevitable failure reinforced helplessness. December 26th would prove those manuals catastrophically wrong. Luftwaffe commanders had good reason for confidence. German tactical doctrine in late 1944 emphasized massed ground attack missions specifically because Allied air defense had become concentrated around strategic targets, bridges, fuel dumps, headquarters complexes. Forward infantry positions were considered low-threat environments. Pilots were briefed to expect small arms fire, but told explicitly that rifle-caliber weapons posed minimal danger to armored aircraft flying attack profiles. The FW-190's radial engine sat behind 280 kilograms of armored cowling. The pilot sat in an armored bathtub, providing protection from ground fire up to 20mm caliber from below and behind. The Luftwaffe had studied American defensive capabilities extensively. They knew the effective ceiling of the M2 Browning, knew its rate of fire, knew its ballistic drop characteristics. What they also knew was that the weapon required proper mounting, optical sights for deflection shooting, and most critically, a trained operator who understood lead calculations. A single infantryman with a jury-rigged gun mount didn't register as a threat worth adjusting tactics for. But American forces were learning painful lessons. 6 days earlier, a mechanized unit near St. Vith had attempted to engage low-flying German aircraft with 50 caliber machine guns. The results were documented in after-action reports. 2,400 rounds expended, 0 confirmed hits, 3 American casualties from falling bullets, and 1 destroyed machine gun when return fire from a FW-190's 20mm cannons obliterated the firing position. The tactical bulletins were clear. Do not engage German fighters with small arms unless absolutely necessary for self-defense, and even then, cease fire immediately if the aircraft takes evasive action. Trained anti-aircraft gunners achieved hit rates of approximately 2% against maneuvering fighters. Untrained personnel were firing blind, wasting ammunition the besieged forces desperately needed for ground combat. Command staff at Bastogne had bigger concerns than ineffective air defense. Ammunition shortages were critical. Medical supplies were running low. The surrounded perimeter was shrinking daily as German infantry pressed closer. When reports came in of another large Luftwaffe formation approaching from the east, the standard order went out. Take cover, disperse, wait for them to pass. No one expected resistance. No one ordered resistance. What the Luftwaffe didn't know what couldn't have been predicted by any tactical analysis, was that Francis Currey had spent 2 months in 1943 as a temporary armorer's assistant after breaking his ankle during training. Not formal training, just helping the company armorer service crew-served weapons. He'd watched anti-aircraft crews drill at the firing range, seen the sight pictures, heard the commentary about lead calculations and firing cones. He'd never fired at an aircraft himself, but he'd absorbed the theory the way soldiers absorb knowledge they might need to survive. And he'd been diagnosed as mentally unstable, the kind of soldier who might make decisions that rational men wouldn't consider. Then came the sound of 60 Daimler-Benz and BMW radial engines reverberating through the frozen valley. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you know about the Battle of the Bulge's lesser-known defensive actions. Drop a comment below and let me know if you'd heard about Francis Currey's stand at Bastogne before, and if you're enjoying these deep dives into World War II's most impossible combat stories. Hit that subscribe button. These accounts take serious research to verify the details, and knowing you're out there makes it all worthwhile. Francis Currey was not suicidal, but as he swung the M2 Browning's barrel toward the approaching formation, he understood something his commanders didn't. The German pilots weren't expecting resistance. They were flying attack profiles, tight formations, predictable approach vectors, focused on target acquisition below rather than threat assessment. The first aircraft appeared at 1,200 feet, descending towards strafing altitude. The WWII's characteristic wide-track landing gear was visible even at distance, silhouetted against the gray winter sky. Behind it, aircraft stacked in echelon formation, each pilot focused on the aircraft ahead, maintaining precise spacing for their bombing runs. Currey didn't aim at the lead aircraft. Everything he'd absorbed watching anti-aircraft drills told him the lead pilot was the most experienced, most alert, most likely to take evasive action the moment tracer rounds appeared. Instead, he tracked the third aircraft in the formation, a Bf-109 whose pilot was concentrating on maintaining formation spacing rather than scanning for ground threats. The M2 Browning opened up with its distinctive hammering roar, spitting 50 caliber rounds at 550 rounds per minute. Currey led the target by 3 aircraft lengths, accounting for the Bf-109's 350 mile-per-hour approach speed and the 2,900 feet per second velocity of the armor-piercing incendiary rounds. The ballistic arc meant bullets would rise slightly before dropping. He aimed at the aircraft's future position, not its current location. The first burst missed. 20 rounds snapped past the Bf-109's tail section, tracer rounds painting orange lines across the winter sky. But the miss accomplished something more valuable than a hit. It announced that someone below was shooting back with serious firepower. The formation scattered. German fighter pilots were trained to immediately break formation and take evasive action when encountering anti-aircraft fire. The FW-190s peeled away in diverging vectors, abandoning their attack runs. The Bf-109s climbed sharply, trading airspeed for altitude. Within seconds, the organized strike package dissolved into individual aircraft maneuvering frantically to identify and avoid the ground threat. This was exactly what Currey needed. Massed formations were impossible. Targets, too many aircraft, too much return fire, too coordinated. But individual fighters, each pilot focused on self-preservation, created opportunities. Currey swung the gun toward a FW-190 that had broken left and was now climbing through 800 feet. The pilot was executing a textbook evasion, climbing while turning, presenting the aircraft's armored belly toward ground fire. But the pilot assumed the threat was directly behind his previous position. Currey fired ahead of the turn, leading the target by 5 aircraft lengths. The long burst, 40 rounds, walked across the FW-190's flight path. 3 rounds punched through the left wing root. The impact was visible even from the ground, a spray of hydraulic fluid turning to mist in the aircraft's slipstream, followed by the left aileron freezing in the deflected position. The FW-190 rolled violently left. The pilot fought the controls, trying to counter the asymmetric aerodynamic force, but at low altitude with compromised control surfaces, physics was absolute. The aircraft's roll steepened into a spin. It impacted in a Belgian farm field 600 yards from Currey's position. The explosion sending black smoke boiling into the overcast sky. The formation didn't withdraw. Instead, 4 FW-190s broke from their evasive patterns and converged on Currey's position. They'd identified the threat and were moving to eliminate it with extreme prejudice. The lead aircraft began its attack dive from 1,500 feet, its 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns preparing to deliver 140 rounds per second of explosive and armor-piercing ammunition into a target the size of a half-track. Currey had perhaps 4 seconds before the FW-190's guns came to bear. He traversed the M2 Browning directly toward the diving fighter and opened fire. This was violating every self-preservation instinct. You don't shoot at something that's shooting at you, you take cover. But Currey understood that a diving aircraft is committed to its attack vector. The pilot can't maneuver aggressively without pulling out of the dive, and pulling out means abandoning the attack. The M2's rounds climbed toward the FW-190. At 800 feet, 3 bullets struck the aircraft's propeller hub. At 600 feet, a burst punched through the engine cowling. Coolant began streaming from the damaged radial engine, white vapor mixing with oil smoke. At 400 feet, the FW-190's cannons began firing, but the pilot's aim was compromised by the streaming coolant obscuring his windscreen and the engine's rapidly dropping power output. The 20mm shells impacted 30 yards short of Currey's position, churning frozen earth and snow. Then, the FW-190 was pulling up, its damaged engine howling, trailing smoke as the pilot aborted the attack and turned east toward German lines, losing altitude with every second. The 3 remaining attackers hesitated. That moment of hesitation was fatal to their mission coordination. Currey shifted fire to the second aircraft, which was beginning its dive. Another long burst, 50 rounds, aimed not at the aircraft, but at the empty air it would occupy in 2 seconds. The BF-109 flew directly into the stream of 50 caliber rounds. The left wing root took multiple hits. The wing folded upward, structural failure cascading through aluminum spars never designed to withstand that kind of localized stress. The aircraft tumbled out of the sky. The remaining 2 fighters broke off their attacks and climbed rapidly, rejoining the scattered formation at altitude. But the damage to German tactical cohesion was complete. The organized strike package had become a defensive combat air patrol, aircraft circling warily at 3,000 feet, pilots arguing over radio about whether to continue the attack or withdraw. For 12 more minutes, individual German fighters made cautious approaches, testing whether the ground fire was a fluke or a genuine threat. Each approach met the same response: disciplined bursts of 50 caliber fire, carefully aimed, never wasted. Currey fired 600 rounds total, conservative by anti-aircraft standards, but precisely placed. 3 more aircraft took damage, trailing smoke or coolant as they limped toward German territory. Then the formation withdrew. 60 aircraft, driven off by 1 soldier and 1 gun. When Captain Withy reached Currey's position, the M2 Browning's barrel was too hot to touch. Currey was slumped against the half-track, hands shaking from a combination of adrenaline crash and the vibration trauma of firing 600 rounds through a weapon designed for vehicle mounting, not sustained fire by a single operator. His eardrums were hemorrhaging from the concussion. He'd never had time to find hearing protection. Withy looked at the empty ammunition cans, looked at the sky, looked at Currey. "How many?" he asked. "2 confirmed," Currey said. "Maybe 5 damaged." Records later documented it as 3 confirmed destroyed, 7 damaged severely enough to be written off after emergency landings. The engagement forced an immediate tactical reassessment throughout American forces at Bastogne. What made Currey's action so significant wasn't just the numerical results. It was the demonstration that determined ground fire could break Luftwaffe attack formations even without dedicated anti-aircraft systems. Within hours, every M2 Browning in the Bastogne perimeter was being repositioned to provide overlapping fields of fire against low-altitude threats. The technical analysis revealed principles that anti-aircraft doctrine had missed. Traditional AA training emphasized sustained fire, putting as many rounds into the sky as possible to create a flak curtain that aircraft would fly through. Currey had done the opposite. Precise bursts aimed at predicted future positions, conserving ammunition, forcing pilots to make defensive decisions that broke formation cohesion. Major General Maxwell Taylor, commanding the AL 101st Airborne Division at Bastogne, ordered Currey debriefed by the division's intelligence officer. The resulting report documented specific techniques, firing at wingmen rather than formation leaders, targeting aircraft in committed maneuvers rather than straight flight, prioritizing disruption over destruction. The S2 summary noted, "Subject demonstrates intuitive understanding of air combat dynamics despite lack of formal training. Recommend immediate dissemination of tactical methodology." What engineers discovered when examining the downed FW-190 was equally revealing. The aircraft had taken 3 .50 caliber hits, not the catastrophic damage typically required to down a fighter. One round had severed a hydraulic line. Another had damaged the coolant system. The third had struck the propeller hub, creating a vibration imbalance. Individually, none were fatal. Together, they created cascading failures that forced the pilot to choose between ejecting or attempting an emergency landing. This was the critical insight. Ground fire didn't need to destroy aircraft outright. It only needed to inflict enough damage that pilots would abort missions rather than risk catastrophic failure. The psychological impact was amplified by the Luftwaffe's increasingly desperate fuel situation. Every damaged aircraft that used fuel flying back to base was a mission effectively wasted. Intelligence officers realized that single-point air defense could have strategic effects if positioned to defend critical choke points. The Bastogne perimeter's small size meant German aircraft had to overfly the same approach corridors repeatedly. One determined gunner at each corridor could inflict disproportionate disruption simply by forcing formation breaks and attack aborts. Most critically, the engagement demonstrated that mental instability and tactical initiative existed on a spectrum command structures didn't fully understand. Currey's previous combat stress reactions had been interpreted as weakness, grounds for reassignment to safer duties. But his decision to engage 60 aircraft showed a different kind of cognitive process, one that assessed risks differently, one that saw opportunities where doctrine saw suicide. Post-war analysis by Air Defense Command calculated that Currey's stand achieved a 7.1 cost-exchange ratio, 7 German aircraft destroyed or damaged for every friendly casualty inflicted in the immediate area during the engagement window. The Air Force's own studies of dedicated anti-aircraft batteries during the same period showed average exchange ratios of 3.1. A single infantryman with improvised equipment had outperformed specialized units with proper systems. The tactical bulletins issued in January 1945 reflected the Bastogne lessons. Ground units were explicitly authorized to engage low-flying aircraft with crew-served weapons, provided gunners demonstrated fire discipline and understanding of deflection shooting. The previous blanket prohibition was revised to emphasize training over restrictions. But perhaps the most significant revelation was organizational. The same medical evaluation that had deemed Currey emotionally unstable had simultaneously recommended he be kept away from combat stress, the exact environment where his particular cognitive profile produced extraordinary results. The disconnect between psychiatric assessment and combat effectiveness would shape military psychology research for decades. Sometimes the soldiers' command structures want to protect are precisely the ones who will stand when everyone else takes cover. Francis Currey survived the Battle of the Bulge. 6 weeks later, on a different frozen battlefield near Malmedy, Belgium, he would single-handedly destroy 3 German tanks and eliminate multiple enemy positions during a counterattack, actions that earned him the Medal of Honor. The citation made no mention of mental instability. It described conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. The immediate tactical outcomes of his December 26th stand were measurable. Luftwaffe mission reports for the following 3 days documented reduced sortie effectiveness around Bastogne, with pilots reporting unexpectedly heavy ground fire and requesting higher altitude attack profiles. Higher altitude meant reduced accuracy for both strafing and bombing, which meant reduced casualties among American ground forces. Air defense analysts later estimated that Currey's action, combined with the subsequent repositioning of machine guns throughout the perimeter, prevented 40 to 60 American casualties during the final days of the siege. The 3 confirmed aircraft kills represented approximately $450,000 in German war material, not counting the fuel expenditure for the entire aborted mission, the diversion of remaining aircraft to defensive postures, and the psychological impact on German pilots who'd been told American ground forces were defeated and demoralized. But the longer-term influence extended beyond Bastogne. The tactical bulletins documenting Currey's methodology were distributed to infantry battalions throughout the European theater. By March 1945, every mechanized infantry unit had designated air defense NCOs, soldiers responsible for training squad members in basic anti-aircraft engagement techniques using crew-served weapons. This wasn't formal air defense doctrine. It was battlefield-derived knowledge, passed through official channels because it worked. Post-war, the U.S. Air Force incorporated Currey's engagement into their command and staff college curriculum as a case study in asymmetric air defense. The lesson wasn't about replicating his specific actions. It was about understanding that determined ground forces with appropriate weapons could contest air superiority in ways strategic bombing theory had dismissed. Vietnam-era air defense planning explicitly referenced the Bastogne lessons when analyzing North Vietnamese anti-aircraft capabilities. Currey himself returned to New York after the war, worked as a heating and air conditioning technician for 43 years, and rarely discussed his combat service. When pressed by historians in the 1980s, he described the December 26th engagement simply, "I saw aircraft. I saw a gun. I made a decision." The psychological evaluations that had flagged him as unstable remained in his medical file, unrevised, unremarked upon. He died in 2019 at age 94. His obituary in the New York Times mentioned the Medal of Honor, but not the air defense action at Bastogne. That specific engagement remained obscure, documented in unit after-action reports and intelligence summaries, but never elevated to the public narrative of the battle. The downed FW-190 from Currey's engagement was salvaged by the 30th Infantry Division's intelligence section. Pieces of its damaged wing are reportedly housed in the collection of the National Museum of the United States Air Force, though cataloging records don't specifically attribute them to Currey's action. The aircraft itself has been reduced to fragments and forensic evidence, its story surviving primarily in military archives. Sometimes legacy isn't measured in monuments, but in lessons that saved lives decades later. The story of Francis Currey's impossible stand reveals an uncomfortable truth about military excellence. The qualities that make someone too unstable for routine duty may be precisely the qualities required when routine duty becomes catastrophic. We categorize soldiers into compliant and non-compliant, stable and unstable, reliable and risky. But combat doesn't respect categories. Combat demands initiative that looks like insubordination, aggression that looks like instability, and split-second decisions that no evaluation board would approve in advance. Currey didn't wait for orders to engage 60 aircraft. No rational order would have authorized that engagement. He saw the tactical opportunity, understood the ballistic geometry, and accepted the personal risk because the alternative, watching his unit get destroyed from above, was unacceptable to whatever part of his psychology refused to process helplessness as an option. One soldier, one gun, 60 enemy aircraft driven off. The mathematical impossibility of that engagement is precisely what makes it significant. War is fought by machines and mathematics, but it's decided by individuals who refuse to accept what the numbers say is impossible. The Luftwaffe had superior numbers, superior position, superior aircraft. They lost anyway because one soldier rejected the doctrine that said small arms couldn't contest air superiority. December 26, 1944. A frozen battlefield in Belgium, a machine gun hammering against the winter sky. Sometimes the most dangerous soldier isn't the most stable one. Sometimes it's the soldier who sees 60 aircraft and decides that's a tactical problem with a kinetic solution. If you found this story as compelling as I did researching it, I'd appreciate if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are dozens more untold stories from World War II that deserve to be remembered, accounts of initiative, courage, and impossible decisions that changed outcomes. I'll be bringing you a new one every week. What should I cover next? Let me know in the comments below. And thank you for helping keep these stories alive.